Today we are talking with Dr. Skye de Jongh, who is a gynecologist with a special interest in fertility. And we're going to begin with, what is the menstrual cycle? What are periods and how do they work? Thank you so much for coming to join me today, Skye.
Thank you for having me in your beautiful new home.
Oh, thank you. Such a treat to finally get you here. So today, I would love you to just talk us through how periods work.
Sure. This is something that I find people really don't understand about their bodies. We learn about this in biology at school, but you're kind of not that interested in it at that time, and you forget it along the way. And then suddenly, when you want to conceive, it kind of becomes relevant again. So I find myself teaching people about their bodies when they want to conceive. So I think it's really important to understand this, and it's actually helpful to understand it even before you're trying to conceive. So your cycle, when people talk about your cycle, we're actually talking about from day one of your period. So day one of your period is day one of your cycle. Most people's cycles are between 24 and 38 days.
24 and 38?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can have variation within your own cycle from month to month. So it won't be 28 days every month. You might have 28, then 30, then 27, then 32. That's still considered normal. I wouldn't call that irregular.
Because ladies often worry if they're like, my cycle's 28 days this month, and now it's 29, and now I'm on 30. So it's quite normal to have a few days on each side.
That's quite normal.
Okay.
A few days on each side is fine. So when we start getting to the extremes, when you start getting to more than 7 days difference each month, when you start getting past 35, 38 days, that's when we start to worry, okay, this is not so regular anymore. Okay. So your cycle starts on day one, and it starts with your period. Okay. So at that point, your FSH and LH levels, which are the hormones coming from your pituitary gland in your brain, that are speaking to your ovaries, are super low. Okay. So nothing's happening. Nobody's talking. Okay. Your estrogen and progesterone are also super low. And the lining that built up last month is starting to shed because there's no hormones stimulating it. Okay.
Okay. And no baby to be feeding.
Yes. So then most people will bleed for 3 to 7 days. That's normal. Okay. Less than that, more than that, we start having issues. And when we're talking about how many days you're bleeding for, we're talking about a full flow before 5 p.m. That's your day one.
Okay.
So if
it comes at 6 p.m., then you're counting from the next day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So generally, if it comes during the day, that's your day one. Otherwise, you count from the next day. And what's happening in that time that you're bleeding is that lining that was prepared from last month is shedding to prepare for the next cycle. Okay. So slowly from then, your brain starts to send FSH to your ovaries, which are these little guys here. And that FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, stimulates one follicle per month to grow in your ovaries. So a follicle is a little bubble filled with fluid, and it's got a microscopic egg in it. Now, we've all got multiple follicles in our ovaries per month, and you have many when you're young, and you get fewer and fewer as you get older. Now, only one of them is chosen to ovulate per month, and that FSH causes that one follicle to grow. And it usually takes about 14 days, if you have a 28-day cycle, for that process to happen. When the follicle starts to grow, that follicle in the ovary starts to secrete estrogen. That estrogen is what's responsible for thickening up the uterine lining, or the endometrium. That endometrium should thicken to about 8 to 12 millimeters around the time of ovulation. So that is happening in the first half of your cycle. That's called the follicular phase. Okay.
I saw a thing the other day that said, you remember it's the follicular phase first.
Yes.
Yes.
So once the estrogen levels are high enough, usually about more than 500, that estrogen triggers a message in your brain to say, all right, we're about ready to ovulate. At that point, that golden follicle that's been chosen is usually about 18 millimeters in size. And then your brain sends LH. So you might have heard about the LH surge associated with ovulation. So that's when the LH comes from the brain and it speaks to the ovary and it says, all right, cool, ovulate, let that egg out.
And that's what the ovulation sticks do?
Yes.
Okay, so they're measuring the LH.
Yes. So your LH will peak and then you will ovulate 36 hours later. So your window of opportunity when you are trying to conceive is about 5 days before this happens. So if you're ovulating on day 14, we're talking about day 9. And if you ovulate, if your LH surge is on day 13, then we're talking about day 14. So from day 9 to day 14 is sort of where you're going to be most fertile.
Okay.
So the LH comes and it releases that egg. It's available for 36 hours after that LH surge. And then what's left is the corpus luteum. So what happens is that follicle sort of releases the egg and then it sort of collapses and it starts to secrete progesterone. And that progesterone then acts on the endometrium and makes it all squishy and it makes it a nice place for a baby to implant. And generally, a baby would, or an embryo would implant 5 days later. And so that's why when we're doing IVF, we transfer day 5 embryos because that's when physiologically it would be ready. You can't pick up that you're pregnant 5 days later. The earliest you can pick it up is really sort of 10 to 14 days after ovulation. So when you would skip your period. What's interesting about your cycle is that the first part of the cycle, the follicular phase, can be variable in length, but the second half, the luteal phase, so from ovulation to your period, is always the same. It's always 14 days. So it's your period, your ovulation might be later, but from ovulation to period should always be 14 days.
And I think this is also where so many ladies assume they're ovulating on day 14, but actually if you've got a 32-day cycle, you're actually ovulating 14 days before day 32.
Yes, exactly. So it's going to be variable. So you've got to, we'll talk a little bit more about timed intercourse and how to do it in the best way, but generally you need to understand how your cycle works and you need to also understand that it's not going to be the same every month and that you've got to allow for a little bit of wiggle room. And then, of course, when we get to day 28 and then you don't conceive, then those estrogen and progesterone levels that have been quite nice and high suddenly plummet, and that's what causes your period in the end. Again.
And then it all begins again.
Yep, unfortunately.
Thank you, Skye. That is so helpful. I think especially knowing that it's okay if your period does change within 1, 2, 3 days each month. And so important to remember if you're trying to conceive, you are not always ovulating on day 14, but you will always, if your period does come, it will come 14 days after you've ovulated. So especially for people using the apps to track your ovulation, don't just rely on that mythical number of day 14 of being the deciding day of when you're ovulating.